everyone, how's it going? So in case you're just joining us, hi, my name is Atousa, I'm a third year medical student and I'm making a video every day in the month of November. So the topic of today's video is going to be all about doing a summer placement in biomedical science. Now this is a question that I have been asked a couple of times by a number of you, so I wanted to address it today and I wanted to share with you a little bit of my own experience, a bit of my own journey, but I also asked you guys to send me any questions you had on Instagram, so at the end of this video I'm going to be answering a bunch of the questions that you sent in as well. So just to give you a quick background, if any of you guys are new here, I studied biomedical science at the University of Newcastle back in 2012 to 2015. And I have to say, I really enjoyed my experience and I really enjoyed studying biomedical science. Now, it's quite typical for a lot of biomed courses to offer either a year placement in which you can take a year off during your studies to go and work, or some sort of summer placement within the course. And my university was no exception. So in our first year of biomed, I remember we had a talk, and the talk was trying to give students information about what they had to do if they would like to take a year in industry. So that's what it was called at my university, but I know in other places they can call it a placement year, they can call it an extramural year, a year in industry, or anything similar to that. Now, because this was in first year, I still personally wasn't sure about what I wanted to do, so I decided not to opt in to that option then. But I remember when I got into my second year, then I started thinking a bit more about doing lab work, and I remember just wanting to have a bit more experience. If you're already studying a biomedical science course, you might have the same experience that your course might just be quite large in number. So for me personally, I think there were over 300 people on our course, and that meant that whenever we had lab sessions, there would be around 50 to 60 students in a group. And while that's not necessarily a problem, especially because we had like these huge labs that we could practice doing experiments and things like that on, it was a problem in the sense that we only had a handful of modulators that would go around and help us on things. So it may be something like one PhD student or one teaching fellow to maybe 8 undergrad students. And a lot of the times I personally didn't feel that confident in the lab and I didn't feel super proficient at what I was doing. And for that reason, I really wanted to get some sort of summer placement just so I can learn a little bit more as part of a group and to sort of learn from actual PhD students and postdocs who are working on research and carrying out these projects. Now at Newcastle, the university had this scheme that was called, I want to say something like vacation internships or summer internships or something like that, where you could essentially go and work as part of a lab after your second year during that summer, and then you would write up a 1,000-word report as well as creating a poster that you could present at a presentation evening. The only factor with this scheme was that you yourself had to secure your project. So it wasn't like other places where, for example, there'd be a number of projects available and you get to pick and choose, but it was more of the case that you had to contact supervisors and you would have to try and find a lab that could accommodate you, and if that was possible for you, then you can enroll onto this scheme. And the good thing about the scheme was that they also had a certain amount of funding that they could give to students who are coming and working during the summer. So at least you had a little bit of funding to subsidize you for your time. I have to say that it can be a little bit daunting trying to organize things like this yourself. So I remember when I was looking for mine, I ended up emailing, I want to say around 20 different individuals, and I think maybe about a half actually got back to me, and out of the half that got back to me, a lot of them were unable to take on a student, either because somebody else had already been secured in that slot, or because they didn't have the time or they didn't have the resources to take on an undergraduate student. And the project area that I specifically was interested in was cancer biology, but I think I did also apply to a couple of hematology labs and I think maybe neuroscience. And when I say apply, I mean I ended up emailing some supervisors who ran those groups. Now very fortunately, a supervisor did get back to me and he was working within a breast cancer research lab, which I'm so grateful for, and honestly, like to this day, I'm not sure if he knows just how much of a great opportunity that was for me, because if any of you have followed my story, you know that I went on to do a master's and my 2 projects were on breast cancer, and then I carried on working as a research assistant, again working on breast cancer. So it was this little tiny 10-week project that really kicked off all that was yet to come for me, so I'm very grateful for it. Now, the projects and the placements themselves differed depending on what group you were in. I remember speaking to a couple of friends who had a lot of lab involvement and a couple of other friends who had less lab involvement, but they did a lot more analysis and they did a lot more theory-based work. In my case, my supervisor paired me up with a postdoc, and actually there was another student there as well. So there were 2 students from the same course, and I was paired with a postdoc. My friend, who was the other person, was paired with a PhD student, and our supervisor pretty much just threw us in. I remember literally from the very first day, my project ended up being quite hands-on. I remember learning about Western blots, and oh my god, Western blots, and I remember learning PCR and just cell culture, and I made so many mistakes. I contaminated my cells, I would keep like messing reagents up at the beginning. But the postdoc and the PhD student who were in the lab were both incredibly kind and incredibly patient with both me and my friend. And I'm sharing this story with you just to let you know that I know it can be quite daunting if you are a undergraduate student and you do want to go and do these placements. For the most part, I would say people do remember what it was like to be a student, and for the most part, people are very keen and want to help you. So after a couple of weeks of just kind of getting into it and getting a bit more comfortable, I would carry out a bunch of experiments guided by my postdoc, and by the end of the 10 weeks, I had created this poster. Here is a picture of me presenting that poster on our poster presentation evening. So overall, I have to say my experience was an incredibly positive one, and I would highly encourage any of you guys to go and do either a year placement or a summer placement if your university encourages you and allows you to do that. But now I do want to answer a couple of the questions you guys sent in, so let's get into those. Now, the first question is from Kashmir from Instagram, and she asks, why didn't you go for a placement year? Because most universities offer it after the 2nd year. So this is sort of what I was saying at the beginning. So we were introduced to the idea or the possibility of doing an extramural year in our 1st year. And I think it was only a couple of months into the actual course. And at the time I was in 2 minds about whether I wanted to take an entire year out or not. I decided against it for a number of reasons. One of them is that at the time when we were given this information, I had actually opted into the 4-year master's course, and as I explained in one of my previous videos, I switched back to a 3-year undergrad course instead. But because I was already on this 4-year course, I thought I don't really want to have to take another extra year just to get this industrial experience. And I thought a summer placement might be better because it is sort of like a small taster. Although again, if you're familiar with the content that I make on my channel, looking back in hindsight, I do advocate for taking the extra year and going and working in placement. Because I think it's one of those great opportunities that allows you to learn so many new skills, and it does give you a bit of a break from studying, to be honest. Like, you get to take a year out, really immerse yourself in work or in a project or within an industry, learn all of those skills, and then come back and complete your final year. The next question comes from Purana, and I hope that I've pronounced that correctly, but they ask, what was the subject in, as there are many to choose from in Biomed? Yes, so as I said, my topic happened to be in cancer biology, and that was simply on the basis of the supervisor who got back to me. Now, I remember emailing other supervisors within the cancer biology field. I think within our university there were a number of people doing blood cancer, so things like leukemia and lymphoma. And actually, when I ended up doing my 3rd year dissertation, and this is a project that you have to do just as part of the undergrad, I ended up doing it in leukemia, or AML, which is acute myeloid leukemia. And it was literally like the lab next door to the one that I ended up doing the summer placement in, which was handy because I already knew my way around and I knew some of the people, so that was definitely a plus. But yes, that is the topic that I did my placement in. The next question comes from Priscilla, and she asks, is it better to do a placement after the 1st or the 2nd year of biomedical science? And the second question is it more useful to take an extramural year instead of doing a summer placement in terms of how useful it is for getting lab experience? So starting off with the first question, I think the majority of people tend to do the placement after the second year, and I think this is mostly because in your first year you're new, you're just settling in, you're spending a lot more time learning about all of the basics and the fundamentals, so you might not necessarily have a big enough grasp to know which area you'd like to specialize in. Now I know that that's not necessarily true for all people, but generally I think by the end of your second year you've been introduced to enough content, to enough areas for you to think, actually I'd quite like to explore this topic a bit more. Having said that, if you have just finished your first year, or if you are coming up to the summer holidays after your first year and you're keen and you're excited and you'd like to do a placement, then I would say there's nothing holding you back from reaching those supervisors and seeing if you can go into the lab in that way. As for your second question, which is more useful, taking an extramural year or doing a summer placement in terms of getting lab work, I personally would say taking the extra year would be more beneficial to you. I think it depends what the purpose is for you doing the placement. So as I said at the beginning, the reason why I wanted to do the summer placement was to just get a bit more confidence in the lab. I wanted to learn some skills, especially as we were supposed to have a lab project in our third year anyway for our dissertation. I wanted to get a bit more comfortable before we moved on to that project. However, if you know that you would like to go and work in a lab and you want specific lab research in that sense, then I would highly recommend doing the extra year, because although the summer placement is incredibly useful, I think 10 weeks is still quite a short amount of time, and while you do learn a number of skills, I think you would be able to learn things in much more detail if you were to do a whole year. And I think the other advantage of doing a year instead of just a summer placement is that the experience that you get in that year could be equivalent to doing a master's. And the reason why I say this is because after I did my undergraduate, I did a research master's in translational cancer medicine, and that was basically a cancer research degree. And I ended up doing 2 6-month projects and essentially spending a year in the lab. Now, when I was applying for jobs afterwards, I started my job role at the same time with one of my colleagues, and we were a similar age and we both had similar experiences, except my year of lab work was part of my master's, whereas her year of lab work was as part of a summer placement. Sorry, not a summer placement. Her year of work experience was as part of a extramural year that she had taken to go and work in a lab. So essentially, we both ended up having the same amount of experience, which was a year in a lab, except mine was as part of my master's and hers was as part of the year-long placement that she did. And I believe she had gotten paid to do her year-long placement, whereas I had to pay for my master's myself. So that's something to consider. The next question is again from Instagram, from Rand, and he asks, how long do you have to do the placement after graduation to start working in the lab? Now, there isn't any, I suppose, black and white answer to this question. I think when you come to applying for jobs, certain jobs will be happy that you have done just the summer placement and they'll take you on. Whereas other jobs might want you to have done a little bit more, so they may want you to have done a year. Maybe they would class that as having an adequate amount. And I think that's the reason why in my previous answer I was encouraging you guys to do this in extra year if you can. And finally, the last question comes from Kishan, and he asks, what are the virtual opportunities in order to get placement experience, and are there any opportunities for international students? Now, I'm going to make a separate video talking about getting virtual work experience, because I know with everything that's going on with the pandemic, a lot of people are struggling to get work experience and they do want to know this. So I'm going to save that for a whole separate video. But in terms of opportunities for international students, I would say the exact same thing as if you were a home student. If you are an international student and you're currently studying within a UK university, you can email your supervisors exactly the same as how the home students would do it and try to secure a place that way. Equally, if you mean that you are currently somewhere outside of the UK and you're looking for work experience or to try and do a summer placement, I would say contact your own university and see what opportunities are available to you. And I suppose just to throw this in there, because I want to make sure I got your question correct, if you're asking me, can you come to the UK to do a summer placement if you're currently living outside of the UK? As as far as I'm aware, there isn't a program or anything put in place, so perhaps you could contact some UK supervisors, although I would say that should be assessed on a case-by-case basis, and whether somebody accepts you or not, I think that very much depends on the individual. I suppose it is worth a try, but I would say if you're currently living outside of the UK and you want some work experience, it might be just as beneficial for you to contact any local universities close to you. So I hope this video has been helpful, guys. If you have any further questions, leave them below. And as I said, I'm making a video every day in November, so if you have any other questions, then let me know, and I will see you in tomorrow's video.